Hello and welcome to our third webinar hosted by the Recycling Partnership Center for Sustainable Behavior and Impact, where we are laser focused on improving resident participation in recycling programs. We have got an energizing and thought-provoking discussion lined up for you today. I'm Louise Bruce, and I am beyond delighted to be your moderator for today's discussion. This webinar, this third webinar in our series, was actually inspired by a request from an audience member. So for those of you who attended our first two webinars, the first which focused on motivational messaging and the second on recycling behaviors inside the home, you'll remember that we had far too little time to answer all of the incredible questions that came in from our audience. So we're using our time together today to answer as many of those questions as we possibly can. We've gathered all the questions that you submitted via our chat during the webinars, by the survey following up on the webinar, and then the questions that came through in your registration for today's webinar. And we invited all of our panelists back to continue the discussion. And to my great delight, they all accepted. I think that's really a wonderful reflection of how important we all know this discussion on recycling behaviors is, and how engaged our panel as well as all of our audience members are in really driving increased participation and capture of recyclable material across the country. I'm just so grateful for that. I'll be inviting all of our panelists back on screen in just a moment, but first I wanted to invite my colleague Kevin Goolsby to share how you can access the Recycling Partnership's resources through our new Recycling Program Solutions Hub. And just before I hi Kevin. Great to see you. Before I hand the mic over to Kevin, I wanted to kick us off with a little bit with an intro in the chat, a chat warm up. So as is our tradition, we know there is incredible expertise and just an incredible group of people who are joining us today as our audience. And so we'd love to hear from you. If you could take a moment in the chat to introduce yourself, let us know your name, your affiliation, and where in the country you're calling in from. And with that, Kevin, the mic and the screen is yours.
Thank you, Louise, and welcome everyone to our third webinar. As Louise mentioned, I'm here to show you where the previous recordings for the webinar are held, and that would be in our Recycling Program Solutions Hub. And so the Solutions Hub is the Recycling Partnership's latest tool and resource. And so it's an interactive tool and resource designed for local recycling staff to connect, optimize, and propel the recycling programs forward. And within the hub, you have access to a U.S. recycling map that shares program attributes as well as allows local recycling staff to update their data. And as relates to today, within the hub, you have access to all of the Recycling Partnership's courses as well as resources, where most of our panelists will reference the resources housed in the tool. And so with that, there's a link that's going to be dropped in the chat where you can access the hub for yourself. And so I ask that you please follow along so then that way you can find the previous recordings to the webinar. And so with that, you're first going to log into community.recyclingpartnership.org and create an account. And so I'll take about 5 seconds, allow everyone to go to that link in the chat. And if you are at the link in the chat, just drop a thumbs up or say you're there. That way we know that everyone's following along and that you're able to access the recordings to the previous webinars, which has a lot of great content in there. And if you have any questions, I'll be in the chat afterwards as well. And so once you're at this page, you want to go to course catalog. And from there, you want to just scroll down. And once you scroll down, you will see this first course right here, the newest one, Incorporating Motivational Messaging for Recycling Education and Outreach. And you'll click that. And then here you are, you're at the webinar, and we'll add the second one in a little bit after this webinar today. And then you want to click Add to My List. And from there, you're able to watch the webinar replay as many times as you would like. And then one other thing we like to highlight is that most of the content that our panelists will reference today will also be housed in the resources section. And so we have the knowledge report as well as our multifamily contamination kit and other anti-contamination kits in the resources section as well. So feel free to look into these resources and let us know if you have any questions. So with that, enjoy the webinar. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Kevin. And I love these intros in the chat. I'm seeing representation from Santa Cruz, from Texas, from New Jersey and Baltimore, and just across the country. It's really amazing to see how many people and sort of all the jurisdictions represented in the conversation today. So keep that energy in the chat up. We really are paying attention to your questions, comments, and it's just really helpful for our panelists who can't see you to be able to hear you in the chat. So with that, Kevin will be available in the chat to troubleshoot if you're trying to log into the hub and you have any questions for him. He'll share the link and so forth so that you can get access to all those resources that he just walked through. I will now take us into our program. So I'd like to welcome all of our panelists. Please join me on camera. So as our incredible panel is joining us, I want to share that one of our leading motivations for hosting today's webinar is to be able to take the insights, the research, the evidence and data that they all shared through presentations over the past 2 webinars and turn that into action. And so I'd like to start us off with a theme that came from one of our audience members along those lines. And we're going to ask this question of all of our panelists. So the question is, if a jurisdiction were only going to implement one change to improve public engagement in recycling, based on your research, what would you suggest it be? What should local level programs prioritize in order to increase resident participation in recycling? So we're going to get right to the punchline here. I'd love each panelist to respond to this. And before responding, please introduce yourself to our audience. We'll kick it off with Michelle.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Michelle Metzler, and I'm a Director of Community Programs with the Recycling Partnership. And my team and I work with communities to improve recycling programs. So my one piece of advice for communities would be to set up the system with behavior in mind, ensuring that recycling is convenient. So no matter the structure of the program, there are ways to make it more convenient. So if you have drop-off recycling, consider the locations of the recycling. If you have curbside, opt-in is less convenient than universal. And so really thinking about how to make recycling easy for residents. And with any system, pay as you throw has been identified as the most critical contributor to recycling program success. And in this system, residents pay to dispose of a larger quantity of garbage, creating a financial incentive to recycle. And if you don't have control over the system, you can still work to influence the system in your community while creating engaging recycling resources for residents. And I'll pass it to Brandon.
Great, thank you, Michelle. I'm Brandon Berry. I'm a social psychologist from a research firm called Point Forward. One thing I'd recommend in any messaging and resources you create for residents is acknowledge the diversity of homegrown recycling systems that people use. And in doing this, be agnostic about which system is right or wrong. Some of you might remember from our research results presented in the last webinar that some people prefer not to use a container for collecting recyclables. They rather accumulate them on a kitchen counter or next to their trash bin. Some people put their recycling bin in a peripheral area of their home, like in a laundry room. Others have a distributed system with an eclectic set of containers like wicker baskets and plastic boxes in different parts of their homes. The point here is that each of these systems can work well for their users. We think the more you're able to acknowledge how people really do recycling in their homes, the more they can let go of any uncertainty and even embarrassment they may have about how they do things. And we think this can help enable them to see their own system with clear eyes, which opens them up to the possibility of learning and improving. So the point is to honor their systems and the messaging and resources you create and move away from a more corrective approach where we're implicitly telling them that one system type is the right way. And I'll turn it over to Lisa.
Thank you, Brandon. Hi, everybody. I'm Lisa Ruggiero, speaking today on behalf of the Recycle Right New York campaign. That's an initiative between the Syracuse University Center for Sustainable Community Solutions and the Center for Sustainable Materials Management at SUNY ESF. Okay, so gosh, one thing to improve public engagement in recycling, I'm gonna have to go with transparency. I think folks are really, experiencing a lot of doubt around recycling now. We have our work cut out for us to kind of restore faith in our systems and our processes. So anything that we can do to really show and illustrate recycling and that it's real and that it's happening. I think you can do that through tours. I think you can do that through listening and being responsive to people's questions and having a place for people to come and ask those questions and get honest information about that. Will go a long way to helping our credibility as educators and outreach professionals. And I will turn it over to Elizabeth now.
Thank you, Lisa. That's great. Elizabeth Schussler with the Recycling Partnership. I completely agree with the transparency, Lisa. I also really like what Michelle and Brandon have said. And I think, gosh, there are so many great ideas. I think the things I would focus on to start are like really digging into what assumptions you're making. What are you seeing? And what assumptions are you making about what you're seeing? And really kind of dig into like an investigator, like a forensic investigator of what is happening. Like in one community, for example, there was one area where people kind of stopped setting out over time. And when they went to investigate, they saw that the wheels, the R&D delivering the carts to that street or that route, the wheels were coming off the carts. So, just don't make assumptions about how they feel or what they're why they're doing things, but really start to unpack what it is that you're seeing and start to imagine what the reasons might be. And then also look at it from the people point of view and what are the signals that the people are seeing? What's the information that they're receiving? And just be more certain. So, and I will pass it to Alita.
Thanks, team. So happy to be here with our audience and get their questions answered. I'm Alita King, Community Program Manager with the Recycling Partnership, work on Michelle's team. I'm proud to say, going to be here with the partnership for 5 years. And I joined the webinars previously to discuss our work with in-home bins in single-family households. And based on that research and some other research around that body of research, I'm going to throw out one very tactical approach, which is one mailer, it's just not enough. So for our communities who are doing that, whether you are dealing with participation or contamination issues, or whether you have a high-performing program, we can recommend that you really need to have a continuous streamline of communication through mailers and other communication tactics. And also goes along with what Lisa was mentioning about transparency. We're starting to uncover that what helps folks believe in the recycling system is getting that clear and concise education. Additionally, one other thing, if you are struggling with participation, try in-home bins for your non-participants or low participants, as we have seen some success with that. And if you try it, we'd love to hear how it goes for you. So that may be 2 things, but we'll call it one. And Tom, the floor is yours.
Yes, thanks, Alita. I'm Tom Williams. I am with Point Forward, the ethnographic research firm that's working with the partnership. And the one beneficial thing that I'd add to this conversation is to go after all the misinformation that's out there. As we do our research going into people's homes and seeing how they recycle and talk to them, we keep hearing over and over again that a lot of people believe that it's all getting dumped into the landfill, that materials are not actually being recycled, that they have doubts that recycling offers any benefits. And a lot of times it's real conspiracy stuff. They'll say that they saw something or heard something, or they have some insider information that proves this is true. But even when they just have doubts about what is actually happening, or they see confusing data, it can dampen their enthusiasm for recycling well and doing it consistently. So I guess my idea is to kind of hit this head on and to refute the idea that nothing is happening out there and offer clear descriptions, tangible evidence of what is actually happening, to refute all this misinformation. And then I happened to notice just today on the New York Times website, there's an opinion piece that people might want to check out. The reality of recycling is appalling, but we can fix it, where Oliver Franklin Wallace kind of tackles this issue as well. And with that, I will pass it to Asami.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Asami Tanimoto. I oversee measurement work at the partnership. In the last webinar, I shared some data the partnership has on what percent of materials recycling participants are putting in the recycling bin as opposed to the trash bin, and how the amount of capture decreases across the city because of people not participating in recycling. So do you know what these numbers look like for your community? You know, how many tons are collected, how many households are being served, how many households are participating, how well are these participants putting the recyclables in the recycling bin? It's so easy to jump in and try to engage with residents, but I would take one step back and measure how your program is performing. And once you know your tonnage collected, the number of households, the participation data, capture data, and it's best if you have this info by route. So you'll know where you are now, and you can target your efforts where it's most needed, and then measure again once you've engaged with your residents to see how well it worked. So think about how you can resource that. Think about how you can incorporate measurement into what you're doing. So I will pass it along to Joseph.
Hey everybody, Joseph Sherlock, Joey. I am a behavioral scientist, so I'm a principal behavioral scientist at Duke University. And wow, really a lot of great stuff so far. I think it's pretty tough to follow that. But as a behavioral scientist, I think I would start with the sort of one and golden rule in behavioral science, which is make it easy. If we want people to do something, make it easy. Make it simple, reduce friction. So some ideas that follow with that lens. Some of these have been mentioned, but definitely make the recycling cadence weekly where possible. Make sure that the bins and the carts are big enough and appropriately placed. Give people indoor bins if we can. Give people point of decision aids. So sort of rather than giving people education at disparate times, give people point of decision support. And provide appropriate, I guess, public communication so that everyone is starting with a strong understanding. So overall, I think the lens I would suggest is how can we make it easy? How can we reduce friction? And I think with that, I'm the last one, so I'll pass it back.
Joseph, I love that point of, or the sort of contrast you drew there between point of decision support and education and outreach. Can you describe for us more specifically what that could look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So look, education is useful, and I think I mentioned we need to make sure everyone has a baseline, but just sort of blunt education often isn't effective at changing behavior unless there's a strong knowledge or information gap. But that's typically not the case. So instead, education and training and information is most effective when it is just in time. So where we have in the recycling point, this is like the decision is when they're holding something and they're looking to put it in one of the bins available. So you're looking to provide interventions at that point. They're looking to probably put something on the bin or put something on the fridge or try and create an if-then queue so that they know to ask for more information at this point from Alexa or from an app or something along those lines. So you're looking to create your intervention so that it gets in just as that they're making that decision rather than at some other disparate time.
That's really helpful. Wow, this group, Joseph said wow at the beginning of his comments. I want to echo that. Wow, this group has put a lot of really important themes on the table. I heard celebrating the individuality of in-home systems, transparency, authenticity, testing our assumptions, increasing communication, celebrating and supporting, again, in-home systems, going after misinformation head on, making it easy, convenient, and reduce friction. And this concept of point of decision support. So all of those themes, I want us to hold on to them and let's unpack them as we go through this next set of questions, which again have come in from our audience members through the registration form and chat and past webinars. But I do also want to say, we now have 237 audience members, which means we have 237 experts who are not on camera right now. So I want to invite our audience, if you have a kind of single insight to share, if you have a resource that you'd like our panelists to be aware of or your fellow audience members to be aware of that relates to this concept, this theme of increasing participation and capture, please feel welcome to share that in the chat. And now I will switch, I'm going to shift over to a particularly hot topic. So when I look at just like sort of across all the questions that came in from audience members, wish cycling and contamination certainly rose to the top in terms of the number of questions we received about that theme. And so I'd like to begin here with Alida. Would you be able to share how the Recycling Partnership has successfully reduced contamination and how our audience can leverage our resources for their programs?
I would be happy to, Louise. Well, here at the partnership, I think we've tried everything under the sun to reduce contamination, from spatulas to movie theater ads. And while we have seen some of these tactics can prove to show changes, we have a tried and true program at the Recycling Partnership, which is our Feet on the Street program, that does reduce contamination. So hopefully that's really good news for communities who are looking to do this and have not heard of our Feet on the Street program. This program works because it brings consistency, clear education, and repercussions to residents. And it does this by providing tailored curbside feedback to a resident on their cart at least 4 times in a row, dependent on when their collection cycle is. And it shows the resident what they're putting in the cart that they shouldn't be putting in there, and what exactly can go in that recycling cart. It also requires that the resident remove the contamination before that cart is collected if they've received a warning already. So it puts the onus on the resident, requiring them to really take action and understand the significance of that contamination. We've seen a 30% reduction in some programs of contamination when they utilize Feet on the Street. And we've seen communities take this program, adopt it, and make it their own. We have resources for communities to do this in that Solutions Hub under the resources. You can find our anti-contamination toolkit. Also, reach out to us. Anyone here, the partnership would be excited to talk to a community. I'm especially excited to talk to a community about our Feet on the Street program and anti-contamination resources.
Alida, I'm seeing you answered it, but I want to get to the how. I'm seeing a couple questions on how does the community partner with us to run a Feet on the Street program. Do you mind sharing contact information or the specifics on how to get in touch with us in the chat?
I can, yeah. I can share my information, certainly, which would be a start. We also have, our development team who's looking for communities who may want to do this work, and, specifically existing resources that we can get you to. I'm seeing some more questions come in. So I do want to just jump in and answer those if you don't mind, Louise.
Go for it, please do.
One of them is about the consequences. So the consequence in most cases, I will say, is just removing that contamination alone and not having their cart collected, which for those of us who manage programs, you know how angry residents can get when their recycling isn't collected. And so often that alone is a consequence. We have seen communities take it to another level where they will remove a cart if a resident continues to have contamination without showing any improvements. I can tell you though, those numbers at the end of a program often end being very small, like just a really small percentage of residents that continue to contaminate. And there's a lot more coming through. So I'm gonna let you have the floor back, Louise, and I'll jump in here and take a look at these.
Awesome. So Alida will be active in the chat for the next few moments, and we'll shift over to Lisa. So Lisa, we'd love to know, how is the Recycle Right campaign in New York State helping the public understand that wishful recycling is not a good thing?
Thank you so much, Louise. So wish cycling is an important part of our education and outreach campaign. We've created, a short video and posted on our website, kind of illustrating the definition of what wish cycling is, and basic reasons why it's harmful to the recycling system and process. I think most folks on this call are familiar with that type of messaging, but one thing that I think we've been trying to do more of and will continue to do is humanize recycling. I think it's helpful for people to, think about that there's actual people that are going to be touching the materials that you put in your bin. So avoiding those, especially hazardous ones, being considerate of that, when you're rinsing and cleaning materials as well, and not just throwing, a bunch of trash in the recycling bin. I think when we first started talking about wish cycling, we were talking a lot about marketability, and how contamination affects marketability negatively. But I don't think that is playing nicely with our, need to restore faith in the system too. So people feel like even if I put everything in my bin correctly and my neighbor contaminates his bin, this whole bale is going to go in the trash. I don't think that's helpful in increasing participation. So, being transparent about that, yes, we need to keep that real as well, but focusing on, humanizing recycling, that there are real people dealing with these materials is also a helpful angle, I think, to use and have people, empathize for other people in their community working with their materials.
Thanks for that, Lisa. And I we got a number of questions actually from audience members who saw your materials and asked, can we collaborate with you? Can we borrow them? Can we draw inspiration? So I would love to know for the audience today if you don't mind sharing a link to the campaign, so that anyone who's new to the campaign can see it, but then how they should get in touch with you if they're interested in sort of replicating or drawing on your experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I will be happy to put that in the chat. And I'll just say, all of our resources are free and available for people to download and use on any of your platforms, communication channels. We would love it if you just tagged us and let us know when you're using it. But it's all open source. So yes, would love to share and collaborate.
That's awesome. And I think your note on humanizing recycling and thinking about the individual on the other end, or who's really starting off, or the 300 million individuals that are starting off our recycling system across the US, is a really nice segue to this next sort of series of questions that we have around audiences, segmentation, and we saw a number actually around reaching first-time recyclers. So I'd like to take a kind of deeper look at our audience segmentation and ethnographic research with Elizabeth and Brandon. Starting off with Elizabeth, we've been discussing. So one thing that is coming out in sort of the discussion is this idea of kind of these blanketed approaches. So like in contamination reduction, everyone gets the same cart tag and so forth. But your research has made clear that we have distinct audiences who we're speaking to who have different needs potentially, and or sort of respond to different messaging. So for those who tuned into our webinar on audience segmentation research, how can we actually apply your insights, and how can we move beyond where it's helpful and where it's necessary, a kind of blanketed approach to outreach and education and communications?
Yeah, I do want to talk about that, and I want to back up to the wish cycling, because what is wish cycling? What is that really? Like, if we're telling people recycle right, what does that mean? And so I think, like if someone said stop wish driving, like what does that mean? So just making sure that that is internal language and not external language, because it is jargon. And I think try again to look at it with curiosity and say, like, are people putting things in this cart because they don't know where they go? Like, is it a donation and they don't know where donations go? Like, people have really interesting ideas about what goes in a cart and what constitutes recycling. I saw something the other day about compost is another form of recycling. Okay, so that goes in the recycling cart. No, it doesn't. So we've confused people in talking about recycling as being this broad thing. So when we look at, like, the more you can actually look at what's happening and understand exactly what's happening, Is it donations? Is it the sloppy cycling that they don't want to wash it out? Is it a matter of convenience? If there are some people who really just don't want to not collect their things in a bag because it's messy. And so like just telling them, okay, collect it in a bag, but then dump that out and throw the bag away. Like people are pretty, like the people we talk to, most of the people who are that you're seeing recycling in your programs, they want to get it right. But a lot of our language is corrective, and borrowed that term from Brandon. Thank you, Brandon. A lot of the messaging is corrective. And so when it comes to the segmentation, changing topics, when it comes to the segmentation, everyone, all of the people that were in our surveys and segmentation work, everyone needs reassurance that their recycling, their efforts are worth them continuing, that their recycling is becoming something new. There's a discrepancy between believing in recycling is like saying, do you believe in apple pie, or do you believe in goodness of people, versus like, does this particular package go in my recycling cart here? Does it need to go to a household hazardous waste drop off? Also jargon. People, what do people do with this language that we use? How do they interpret it? But I think once you get past that, like, yes, it's worth doing, I think the different audiences like break down that people under the age of 44 were feeling most of the pains. And so rethinking, like Alita said, one postcard's not going to do it, one mailer is not going to do it. Rethinking, how do we get audience at different ages? Because the people over the age of 44, 45 were feeling fewer pains. So not that they are doing everything right and have all of their recycling perfect, but think about, one, the ages and how to reach people differently based on their age and communication preferences. And two, I would say that there's a lot of confusion, conflicted, overwhelmed, frustrated. There's a lot of that going on. So think about when, like, if you've been in like an airport where people aren't sure where to go, like imagine, like put yourself in that position of being frustrated and confused and overwhelmed, and thinking like, what are the things that would signal you've got this, do this, you know, like one specific ask is, we try to just tell everyone everything. So one specific ask and start to work on that. And I think that's, we'll see a shift in our communities being able to communicate with residents in different channels. So yeah. And Brandon, we've also received questions about engaging with people who are not currently participating. What do you think about like getting someone on board?
Yeah, I have 3 points to make about that. I think from our research, we learned that first, make beginning easier for groups who haven't started at all yet. When you can start people, when you can target people who don't yet recycle, encourage them to start small and reinforce the idea that even a small amount helps. We learned that new recyclers are often overwhelmed by all the different material types. So let them get comfortable with one material type like cardboard or plastic bottles. And this feels more manageable to them and creates a behavioral foundation to build on. Number 2 is empower the champions. So in our research, we saw spouses struggling to get their partners and kids on board. We also saw young adults visiting their parents and trying to get them started in their practice. Many households have someone who's enthusiastic about recycling and other members who aren't so disciplined about it. So help the enthusiastic recyclers get their household members on board by creating resources just for them to help them instruct others how to do it and convey the importance, or at the very least, commiserate with them because it's not an easy job. And number 3 is target people who have recently moved. Our research shows that when people move into a new home, They're more open to setting up new systems to organize their space. This is a small window, but it can be, it's a time when they're especially open to hearing how to set up a good system and how to set up their home in general. So, that's the point where we can come in and help them set up something to make recycling in their home more visible, natural, and just easier for them.
I think that's something that really stood out. Oh, we have a chime. I'm just going to chime in with one comment, and then we'll go over to Joseph. When I was with the City of New York, we had a program where when someone filled out a change of address form, they would automatically get a packet from us on how to participate in the local recycling program. Lisa, you may know if that's still in existence and still running strong, but it was so interesting for me to see Brandon, Tom, and Elizabeth's research showing that there's these moments when people are open to change and that we could be working harder to leverage those moments. Because to borrow a phrase from Elizabeth, we're often trying to get people to ask questions they don't know they have. And so those sort of life disruptions and changes are really important times for us to leverage that. Over to you, Joseph.
Yeah, look, I love this idea. To use a few jargony behavioral science terms, we talk about this in terms of habit discontinuity. So, you go through your life with lots of habits, some of them good, some of them less good. And there are these moments that disrupt habits. And those disruptions are really good opportunities for us as people who are looking to make change to get in. So exactly this idea. I love the idea of getting people when they move, encouraging them to set up new ways and systems. We ran a study very similar to this in transportation, where we're trying to break or use the moving as a natural break in commuting habits. And we gave interventions around getting people to commute by not driving. And it seemed to work. The sample size wasn't huge, but it seemed to work, especially quite strongly for some of the subpopulations. So I really endorse that. I think it'd be really cool. And maybe a question to Brandon, Louise, do you have evidence on this? Is there anything you could share? I'd love to read more about it if you have studies on that.
Yeah, you can see some of the evidence in our ethnographic findings, which we can share with you. And I do believe some of this is on the Solutions Hub that others can also access.
We haven't yet, though, gone to so we have the insights. And I'm actually curious, my follow-up question here is what are those other moments? So moving is an obvious one. What are the other moments in people's lives that we could be connecting recycling information to or sort of leveraging for changing those habits for the long term? But I think we haven't yet gone to the phase of actually measuring the impact of something like that, to my knowledge. It's very possible that among our 230 plus audience members, there's been some great work in this area. And so I would love to open up a door to more communication and collaboration in that area. But any more answers to Joseph's question on research that we have? All right, we're going to go to getting the message right. So there's these moments that we want to communicate in. We're thinking about sort of what's going on with people and humanizing the recycling system. Michelle, I'd love to come to you to talk about, so once we are talking to people or when we are sending out communications, how do we get that message right? In your last presentation, you talked to us about a series of motivational messages that we tested and the results from that study. If you could give us a quick recap of what you shared. And then I'd love to, for those in our audience who are planning their 2024 communications to their various audiences, their residents and so forth, what can they do? What practical approach can they take to designing both the motivational and instructional messaging for those pieces?
So in the past webinar, we shared the impact of motivational messages, but I also want to highlight that we didn't run motivational messages alone. So on all of those pieces, there was motivational messaging on one side, and then the other side had images and information about what to recycle. So I think that that's really key to make sure that when we're thinking about motivational messages, that it's also coupled with information about how or what to recycle. I think it's really unlikely that motivational messaging alone would have resulted in similar impacts to what we saw in our various pilots. So with that in mind, I think the most critical elements for messaging are providing residents with clear information on what and how to recycle. And the Recycling Partnerships info cards are a great example of how to categorize information and how to make recycling information really clear. So we found that sorting materials into up to 5 categories and showing examples of the different materials that belong in each of those categories helps make recycling seem simpler. And then also providing no more than 5 items that we don't want in the recycling, the contaminants. And our research has shown that this is the right level of information for most people. There are going to be some residents that want more information. And so a website is helpful to provide the answers to the nitty-gritty questions, but we don't want to overwhelm residents in their mailboxes with too much information. So in addition to the what, the how is also important depending on the system. So do they have to opt in for recycling? How do they do that? Is there a collection schedule that is less frequent than weekly? So those pieces about how to participate are also really critical. And lastly, I'll say that how to incorporate motivational messaging is a bit more complex. We've shared it that motivational empathetic messaging is really promising, acknowledging the challenges that residents are facing with recycling and how confusing this is. Seems likely that it will be important for increasing recycling, but we need more research to really support that this is universally effective. So trying to stay on time.
To follow up quickly, Michelle, we had quite a few requests to test out the messaging that you've seen success with in the field. If anyone who's joining us today is interested in testing our empathetic message, for example, what should they do? How can they get in touch with us?
So yeah, based on our research so far, we think that empathetic messaging is very promising, but this has only been demonstrated in the field in 2 studies to date. And so more research is needed to see if these results can be repeated in other communities. So if you're interested in testing messaging, please reach out to me and we can talk about what that might look like. And then we're also working to make our collateral designs available in early 2024.
Michelle, Lisa, I'm seeing a number, so I'm going to connect a couple of questions for you. I'm curious, sort of along the lines of the question Michelle answered, what have you seen in practice be most successful in terms of the most popular messaging topics or sort of creative that you've designed in your campaign? But also, New York State has both, incredibly dense urban areas like New York City, and then more rural communities. And I've seen a couple of questions both in the chat and then what we received from audience members about that divide. How do we communicate across rural and urban audiences? And I wonder if you have any insights to share.
Yeah, I mean, you're exactly right, Louise. New York's an incredibly diverse state, and we, we've been given the job to create this, messaging for the general public, and folks on this call and panelists here know we really need to do more audience segmentation and talk to more specific audiences to really reach people on a deeper level. With that said, we still have to create messaging that does reach our residents, and I think it's also important to recognize that recycling program coordinators are stretched really thin as it is, and trying to do basic outreach in one way is hard enough and is a big ask. So the how to do that audience segmentation is huge. We're still working on that and learning about that, and we're grateful to the resources that the Recycling Partnership is creating and the research you guys are doing that's helping us do that along the way with everyone else. But as far as what's been effective and catchy on our social channels, a couple things I can mention. So when we use realistic imagery instead of illustrated stuff, we tend to see a slightly higher engagement, and that's consistent with what our partners at the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, the DEC, have seen with their social media too. So, using real pictures of things tends to be a little bit catchier. When we have used a public health or just a health concern about a particular contaminant or item that we've been looking to influence behavior on, we saw that be a little bit more catchy as well. And we just have to be really careful in general because the rules are different everywhere you go across New York State, just as they are across the United States. So we're always, telling folks broadly, usually this is true, but check your local guidelines at the end of every one of our posts and messages. And we have a tool to help folks, connect with their local guidelines as easy as possible. So yeah, it's challenging, but that's a little bit of what we've seen and done. And yeah.
Elizabeth, if you want to jump in, go ahead.
Do you want to jump in? So we wrestled with real images of products, and we worked with communities, and because they do vary from program to program, we created a set of realistic illustrations that allow us to swap things out, products out within the collections of like categories of like what's paper, what's plastics do you take, and then we message tested those and compared them with what happens a lot of times when you're using realistic images. What we noticed programs are challenged with is those are photographed in different ways and different times. Some have labels, some don't have labels, which might send the message that labels need to be taken off when you're really just trying not to promote a product. And so what we've done is stripped out some of the extra information of like the different lighting, the different like labels and caps and those kinds of things. And so our info card is and our image collection is free for anyone to use. And because it's vector based, you can resize it. And so it can be a billboard or it can be on a postcard. So if anyone has more questions about using those resources, our communications team has lots of ideas on how to support communities on messaging.
I hope our audience is hearing a common theme here of we're talking about something, we have the resource, we have the report, we have the research summary, and we want you to have all that you need. So even if we don't get to answering every question today, that summary page that Paloma has been putting in chat should have links. And then of course, we're individually very happy to guide you to the right place. I want to bring us now to what is maybe my favorite question that we got in the audience chat, which is about how do we build long-term habit and behavior change? And I want to bring this question to Joseph and then Tom. So specifically, our audience member asked, many behavior change strategies have noticeable favorable short-term impacts, but how do we move this to long-term impact? So how do we change habits for the long term? Joseph, can I come to you? And then Tom, right after that, we'll go to you.
I mean, it's a pretty tricky question. I don't know if I have the answer, but maybe some notes on it. So I think intuitively, the sort of lighter touch interventions definitely will have shorter term impacts. And there's a lot of research that has this criticism over it. You know, we measure education or we measure some sort of flyer, and we intervene with that, and we're looking to measure, do they change behavior? And we observe behavior for a short period of time, we see an effect, and then we tell everyone, write about it, and the effect doesn't last. This is sort of like a loop that we go on quite a lot. So what can we do to change behavior for the longer term? Well, we need to be thinking about the structures and ecosystems within which people operate. So thinking about, for example, the incentive structure, something that we can put in place that sticks and maintains over time, so people have an opportunity to learn and to make mistakes and get better. So the pay as you throw idea is really nice. I would love to see this tested rigorously and rolled out, but I think that's a really, really promising way forward. And of course, the structures don't necessarily need to be financial. So putting in consistent sort of oops tagging or giving feedback to people when they make mistakes and using that mistake as an opportunity to provide the information and the education. So rather than doing it as a blanket, doing that sort of just in time, that timely point, I think is really important. And then, look, I also had this idea of catching people in critical moments. I think it's difficult to break people out of consistent habits, things that continuous behaviors, things that happen every day, like recycling, or at least making decisions about where and what to throw, we need to look for opportunities for when these habits naturally break, and then intervene and educate at that point in time. And then the last one I'll throw out and then I'll pass over is thinking about how we can make recycling the default. So I think in lots of places it feels like we need to convince or motivate, whereas instead I think of taking the approach of trying to make it the default. So having it absolutely be opt-out rather than opt-in, having it be collected weekly. I know in some places in my local area, it's every 2 weeks. So weekly, I think, is really important, and possibly even not having trash weekly. So things like this, where we are looking to make recycling be the default that everyone does, I think is also likely to be effective. Okay, I'll pause there and hand it back.
Yeah, and I'll build on what Joseph talked about by talking about a model of habits that was popularized by Charles Duhigg in his book, The Power of Habits. And he talks about 3 components of habit formation that are cue, routine, and reward. Where the cue is something that triggers the behavior, the routine is the actual behavior of the habit, and the reward is some kind of positive experience that comes from completing the routine. And all 3 are important to develop long-term habits, right? So if we think about recycling, what's the cue? What's the thing that starts it, right? It can be seeing in-home recycling containers, or in public, just the visual can be a cue. Seeing or hearing the carts of our neighbors being rolled out on the night before pickup. Seeing other family members doing it. These are all examples of cue. Then the second one, routine. So these are the steps of doing recycling. Now, this is where recycling is tricky. If you're trying to start a new habit of, say, taking a multivitamin every day, it's pretty straightforward. There's not a lot of room for error, but we have to think about all these things about determining recyclability, prepping and rinsing the materials, getting all family members to do it, gathering stuff throughout the house, remembering to get the carts out. It's a very complex routine strategy that we need to get at. And, this is this thing about not only do we need to get them to do this habit, we need them to do it very well. The third one is reward. So what is the positive experience we need to emphasize? Feeling like they're contributing to a larger cause, helping the global environment or helping the local environment. It could be something like domestic harmony, just making your spouse happy because your spouse is the one that wants you to do this. There can be an internal pride. But anyway, if we think about cue, routine, reward, and I think in our work, if we think, well, which one am I tackling right now? And am I doing the cue piece? Am I doing the reward piece, the routine piece? And it can be helpful to kind of focus about hitting all 3 of those. Because if you only do 2, and we've met a lot of people who do cue and routine pretty well, but their enthusiasm is dampened, right? Because they don't feel like, what is the reward here? Is anything really happening? So anyway, those are my comments on long-term habits.
That's really insightful. And I don't know how our audience is feeling, but I can just never get enough of this. This is so fascinating. I'm going to give the last word here of the day to Asami, I think. And Asami, everything we've described, to know if it's actually working, we need to measure it, as you know well. So, and we've just seen a tremendous amount of power really in measurement at the Recycling Partnership. So I would love for you to share how local recycling programs can work with us at the Recycling Partnership to measure the impact of their work, and what technical assistance we're able to provide on that front. We had a whole host of questions around how did you do that? How frequent, and et cetera. I know we can't get into necessarily the details for every community today, but at a high level, how can we improve measurement in programs across the country?
Yeah, definitely, keep talking to your fellow recycling coordinators around the country, because they have resources as well. But you can actually read about some of our methodologies and in the centers like summaries of each study. Maybe Kevin can remind people of the link to that. You can also email us, contact any of us really at the partnership. You can email solutionshub@recyclingpartnership.org to ask questions. Our staff that help implement grant projects and conduct pilots, like Alita and Michelle, provide technical assistance so they can, talk to you about not just about the behavior change techniques, but how do you really do the cart tagging? How do you incorporate measurement? How do you I work a lot with communities and states that want to incorporate capture studies, so that for those of you who missed the last webinar, that's doing a sort of both the garbage and the recycling to understand the full picture of what's happening to materials. So I assist communities and states on how to make that happen. So I talk through like the project plans with them. I help review RFPs, connect them to consultants who can do the work, share what we know nationally so you have a benchmark. I'm also always looking for communities that might want to work with us, whether to host a capture study or some intervention work, so that we can help collect data from a variety of communities across the country, so we can, provide better webinars like this as well. So for a capture study specifically, if you are already planning to do a MRF audit or a waste characterization study, I may be able to, chip in so you get the other streams also sampled and sorted, so you can turn that into a full capture study. So there are a variety of ways we can work with you and help you with your planning.
I'd say everyone on this call should take Asami up on her offer. So that's a perfect segue to, I just want to agree wholeheartedly with Julie's comment in the chat that this Q&A went by way too fast. I'm like, toying with hosts keeping us for another couple hours, but since I know you all have very busy schedules, what I'd instead like to do is ask our panelists, if you're willing, to please put your contact information or the best way to get in touch with your programs or your team in the chat, because our hope is that this webinar is not just a place for you to find information in the moment, but really to build strong connections with the experts and sort of the group that's mobilizing around recycling behaviors nationally. I think I have to cut off Q&A here, but again, keep the discussion going by connecting with our panelists. To our audience, in just a moment, I'm going to ask you to join me in what is becoming a tradition for us as well, which is a silent applause. So if you could get your emojis and your comments and all of that ready. But right before you press enter, I want to share that our next event hosted by the Center for Sustainable Behavior and Impact will be a live in-person event in Palo Alto, California, February 21st and 22nd. And many of the speakers you see here will be there with us. So if you're hoping to deepen the conversation, expand your expertise around recycling, participation, and capture of recyclable materials, please join us there. We'll have information out very shortly, certainly before we break for the holidays. With that, get ready for our silent applause. Please go ahead and thank our panelists for their time, their expertise, their insights, and for coming back to join us for continued conversation. We're so excited to continue this into 2024. And thank you to all the incredible audience members who joined us. We know you're bringing an incredible amount of expertise from your side, and we're very aware of that. I look forward to continued connection with you individually as well. Happy holidays, everyone. Thank you, and see you next time.